Welcome to Civil Discourse. I'm Marilyn Brown.
And I'm Jayme Marilyn.
And today we're going to be talking about a couple things, but I first wanted to start off with sharing my shirt that I'm wearing. So let me show that off. So for those of you that are listeners on our podcast, shout out to you guys. It is a blue t-shirt with a big water drop graphic on it that says 4 years forgotten Flint. And so I actually got this shirt. Little Miss Flint, who is an amazing activist. I think she's like 12, 11. Like she's really still super young, and she's been fighting for Flint and for Flint getting clean water since this happened. And it's now been 4 years. It was 4 years, April 24th, that they still do not have clean water. And people are still having to live off of bottled water and bathe in bottled water. Meanwhile, the water program that was going on so that people could get bottled water for free while they were working on it has been completely stopped, but yet people still don't have clean water, still don't have drinkable water. And so it's still a big issue. And Flint isn't the only place that's dealing with this. And so for me, getting this shirt was just important just to kind of put that out there and share that with you guys. So just wanted to share that. And then, and also you can continue to support because she's still buying the shirts, and she does a ton of activism in Flint, Michigan for the Flint kids. She does different activities to take kids in Flint to do certain things. And so it's really, she's really walking the walk at such a young age. And so if you guys want to support her cause, you can definitely find her on Twitter at Little Miss Flint, and she has her links there. So that's the first thing. Next thing I wanted to talk about is it is Mother's Day on Sunday. And so last year we talked about Mother's Day, and I just thought that this was another good time to talk about that because I feel like just mothers in general and the concept of mother and mothering and kind of what that looks like is such an important topic. And it's an important part of, I think, everyone's kind of personal journey. And so I wanted to talk about that today. So I guess I have a quote that I wanted to share, and then we can kind of discuss that. So this is a quote from Erich Fromm, and it's, "A mother's love is peace. It need not be acquired. It need not be deserved."
Yeah, it very much speaks to me with the idea that we often talk about of kind of finding a balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this kind of just being-ism, if you will, of something, just allowing something to just be and not try to control it or feel like there needs to be that we need to add deeper meaning or to it. It just very much is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And just allowing something to be and not needing to define it or for it to change. It's that love is there. It's that true kind of essence of unconditional love that it just is. And I think that's something that we are all kind of seeking, but oftentimes have a really hard time actually connecting to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and last year I feel like we talked a lot about uh, kind of the meaning of the feminine within
Mm,
mother,
mm-hmm,
and I've been thinking a lot lately about that, but also the traits that we normally attribute to the masculine that is very mother. The kind of I think of um, like the imagery I often see is like a tree and the groundedness and the beauty of it, of kind of like just feeding the earth in a way.
yeah.
And I think that kind of grounded, more quote unquote masculine energy of the mother is often overlooked.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah,
think the
yeah.
same?
I think you're right. I think that oftentimes a mother's love is equated to like a softness, kind of a different kind of energy. And I think a mother's love can definitely have that soft kind of nurturing to it, but also, like you said, it's also very stable. It's very grounded and rooted. And I also think of a mother's love as being there's a fierceness to it. You think about like a mother wolf, kind of that protective kind of fierceness that is also a part of that kind of that mother love, and it's all kind of a part of that whole. But I think we tend to focus on the softer qualities because I think that's considered more feminine, and I think that's kind of a part of the, maybe, I don't know if it's part of the kind of patriarchal structure that we live in, that certain things are not allowed to be a part of that feminine love. You know what I mean? I'm because it's interesting, because I think that I think that a mother, that mother love is very well rounded, and yet oftentimes we see it as one way.
Right. And I think that's a cultural thing that happens, because when I think in comparing like the idea of mother to the idea of father, when you actually look at it, the qualities are very similar in a balanced state. And I think just in dualistic society, we try to say, well, what's the difference? And then we try to stick to the differences between them and not really looking at the similarities. And I think especially as our culture becomes, I guess, less gender defined in gender roles and gender stereotypes, you now see a lot more merging of those terms, where you say, oh, the father, and you can equate the same attributes you would normally equate to mother, and vice versa, which I think is a great thing, because there is so much. I mean, I think in being I mean, I'm not a parent, but just I think the best kind of parenting, in my experience as someone who has been parented, is when it's balanced, and that energy between masculine and feminine and mother and father is kind of in balance. Because if it's out of balance, it can get overwhelming so quickly if it's just overbearing, or if it's just nurturing, or if it's just this. Yeah.
Right. And that balance being present in both parents. And so, like, it's not just that balance of, okay, I have a mom, and so her job is to be 100%, have that mother energy, and then the father has to be this way, but recognizing that actually, no, that to have the balance and have a father who is comfortable with things that may have been considered typically mothering, like being more affectionate. I think that we're definitely getting away from those more, like you said, kind of gender normative expectations. I remember when I was younger that there was a much more kind of negative viewpoint of fathers that were affectionate with their sons, physically hugging or kissing their sons or whatever, and kind of like a judgment around that. And I think I'm definitely seeing a shift, that people are getting more comfortable allowing men to be nurturing, and that's actually part of that's a part of a wholeness, that to really be a balanced man, balanced anybody, that you really do have to be able to do both and have a connection to both.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, just because culturally, with there being so many single parents now, I think it kind of messes with the dualistic mindset of mother and a father, and there being defined roles. Because I think even when you ship it away, when there's two people, and if you're in a situation where you're parenting together, right, you as one in many ways are the whole. So not saying that the mother should be a certain way and the father should be a certain way in that dynamic, but as a couple, you can kind of figure out what your dynamic is, and if one person tends to be a little more nurturing, the other person may fill in where that person isn't naturally leaning or whatever. But if you're a single parent, I think you need to be able to, I don't think you need to be, I think there's a stigma around it that you are both parents. So I think it's becoming more accepting that you would have these stereotypical qualities of mother and father, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that the shift from having more single parents and people recognizing that role and learning what that looks like, because I think that, you know, people as as our society and culture has gotten more comfortable with single parents and not marginalizing that as like this strange family that's, you know what I mean, and recognizing that this is a part of our norm. I think that definitely that is shifting and parents are getting more comfortable being looking at both of those roles. And I think, you know, from someone who was raised by a single mom, I hesitate to, you know, like on to say that my mom was both parents, because she was not both parents. You know what I mean? She could not be both parents. I still recognize that I did not have my father there, and yet she did have to fill all of those roles and kind of find a way to help through that. And then, you know, also there's extended family, because I mean, I don't really know any family that like really operates on its own. And so, you know, my uncles and kind of had support from other family members, which I think is helps with the balance as well. You know, I think that like the more we kind of normalize that, like, actually it does take a village and everybody kind of does have different roles to play, and that it's really healthy for kids to have close bonds with different family members. I think that like that helps with more of the balance too, because you don't have to just look at one example. Because I think the struggle is that a lot of times if there's one example, if, you know, your father is very, very strict on gender norms and is very like maybe affectionate with his daughters, but not at all affectionate with his sons, it's hard, because for that son to learn how to then mother yourself enough to be healthy and kind of have, you know, healthy relationships and stuff, you're going to have to learn that somewhere else. And so, and I think that that's kind of what's been coming up for me thinking about mothering, is that really all of us have kind of a role or a responsibility to ourselves to figure out how we love ourselves in that mothering way, and that unconditional, doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't need to be anything to attain it, but that true self-love. And so kind of like what, you know, thinking about what does that look like? And also, how do you do that when maybe there was a disconnect in your own mothering, or that relationship, or not really having a, you know, or the mother's not there anymore, kind of figuring out what that looks like. And so I think that's been a struggle for people, is figuring out how to love themselves in that way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's interesting, because when you think of, when we tried to do this last year of kind of like a definition for the meaning of mother on I guess a more metaphorical level, and as I do that, I always come to thinking about the things we label mother. And the interesting thing to me is that we, as a culture, tend to label Earth one feminine and two mother, the planet itself. And I think there's a idea that the mother, the feminine, is kind of life-giving, and then the masculine, or the father, is life-protecting. I feel like that's kind of the lens in which culturally we see, when I try to break it down in very basic terms. And then it's just interesting to think of that quality of life creating beyond just creating human life, of creating art, or creating relationships, or creating anything that really can be created, has that mother energy behind it.
Right. And yeah, I love that. And thinking about it in that way, because I think that like we're all mothers of something. Like we all, you know, whether it like whatever you're creating, like you said, some piece of art, and you have to love it enough to be willing to bring it into the world and share it and put enough focus on it. And so I think that it expands that idea of motherhood, I think, in a way that makes it a lot more accessible, and kind of recognizing that like motherhood is an energy, like it's a creative energy stream. It's not really just a physical, person or something. And so when we can kind of look at it that way, I think it expands people's experience of what it actually would look like to mother themselves or to feel that connection to something in a mothering way. I talk to like friends who have, something big that they're working on or a big project and really feeling like this is something that I'm birthing. And I I can definitely connect to that is a part of that process.
Yeah. And I always try to, just on Mother's Days too. I mean, uh, uh, celebrate uh, my own mother and the mothers in my life, but also look at it and the big picture of kind of Mother Earth and the interconnectedness of the Earth. And when you think of it that way, it really is a celebration of everything, because the Earth is us and everything on it. So by celebrating the mother as represented by nature, it's
Mm-hmm.
really a celebration of that kind of interconnection that we all share and that energy we all share.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That
I think
energy
it
that
really
we
fits
share,
right.
and that energy that nourishes us all,
Mm-hmm.
that sustains all of us and that nourishes all of us. And that's kind of that same thinking about, a literal mother, that at some point you were physically connected to your mother and being nourished by her. And now we're physically connected to the earth and being nourished by the earth at all times. And that's something that we're all connected, every living thing, every plant, and yeah, that's a pretty, like, when you think about it that way, it's like, wow, it kind of blows my mind.
Yeah, and it's nice to think about it too, because I mean, in our current society, we're so separated from that awareness. I think a lot of times, um, I just think it's not, you don't think about it daily, of the connection to the earth, and that it, literally it is the planet that is nourishing us. It's very easy to kind of feel separate from it. So it's both humbling and very, I think, spiritual and very uh, mindful to
Mhm.
kind of just take some time to really reflect on that. At least it is for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that reflecting on that, I think, is one of the ways that, we feel less lonely in this world. There was a UCLA study recently came out that said, like, I can't remember the numbers right now, but that loneliness is up, that people are really feeling very, very lonely. And there's like a 30% increase in depression right now. And I think that loneliness comes from this feeling of really being disconnected, that a lot of us, it's like we're connected through the internet. We're constantly talking to people, but yet we're actually feeling very disconnected. And so I think that you're right, when we actually can find a way to, because I think it has to be an authentic connection for you and whatever that is. So if meditating on it is what kind of brings you to that place where you can really kind of recognize that connection and feel it, then that's what works. But if for you, you need to go outside and like sit under a tree and, you know what I mean, and experience it that way. But whatever it takes for you to kind of remember that we're all
Mm-hmm.
connected to this planet and we're all being nourished at the same time, and that mirrors our family connections and our life, and kind of that really what I do does actually influence you, and how I show up in the world does matter to people that are thousands of miles away from me. I think that really can help combat that feeling of loneliness, and
Right.
help kind of be a way to kind of be a salve on that.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, though, the different ways you can do that, because we're talking about mindfulness or going out in nature. But for me, also, uh, I'm very intellectual, and science has really
Mm-hmm.
always been able to do that for me, and
Mm-hmm.
just really looking at science and learning new things, you see more and more of the interconnection and how things work. Um, Kind of on that note, I saw the
Mm-hmm.
movie Tully uh, last week, and it's a movie about a uh, woman who is having her third child, and is really struggling to uh, just cope with raising her kids and life balance and all this stuff. But she gets a night nanny And there's this recurring theme with the night nanny, which I don't even know if this is scientifically factual, but it doesn't really matter. One of the comments is about how um, she makes a comment about how the when you give birth, the baby's cells stay within you for years. And then there's another reference to they go back to the woman's old home in New York City, and there's a comment about how, oh, you haven't even been gone long enough for your atoms are still spread out in this area, like parts of you are literally in the air still. And I think just think it, like it's interesting because when I hear it, it sounds very like hippy dippy, you know, like, ooh, I'm still part of this thing. But then the science behind it, it's like, no, that is true. I mean, we're constantly shedding cells and shedding parts of ourselves that plants and other beings are feeding on and are becoming part of other things that the earth is growing. And it's kind of a beautiful reminder of that interconnection and that life process that never ends, because we often think of, right, if you're thinking about mother being this life creator, then you think, well, what's the life destroyer, right? If you're going to go to the opposite. But there, for me, there doesn't really need to be one if life is a constant process. And yes, things by our definition die, but in death comes a new creation. So
right.
in the cycle of it, it's a cycle of life. It's not a cycle of death, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Right. It's a creation cycle that's constantly feeding itself. And so even that recognition that we don't die, like we just get kind of absorbed back into that new cycle is, yeah, I think like that, it's pretty, like it's one of those things that, again, we don't spend time to like think about that. But I think like, yeah, when you talk about how in that movie, how she just kind of pointed out that like there's parts of us that are still scattered in all of these places and that we leave ourselves everywhere we go. I think that again kind of just brings me to a place of feeling more responsible for what I'm leaving and what I'm doing. And, you know, I mean, it's like, I guess like you don't necessarily like have control over the cells that you're leaving in that way. But like, I also feel like the energy is left behind as well. And so I'm very mindful of like kind of what kind of energy I'm leaving in spaces. And, you know, I mean, that it's, I think the more we can recognize how much of a part we actually do play, I think it helps us to just kind of be a little bit more mindful about how we walk on this planet.
Right. Yeah, and it's always this whole kind of topic now has always just been something that really fascinates me both intellectually and kind of spiritually, because uh, I'm often asked by all different kinds of spiritual people, religious people, like what I believe in as after death, or do I believe in heaven? Do I believe in reincarnation? What is it? And for me, it's like I never know how to answer that question, because I don't feel a need to believe in anything, because I think the science of what happens to our bodies is the most amazing thing I could think of. Like I can't the whole idea of the process of creation, that we will decompose and the earth will use our nutrients to grow plants and to feed new beings, and that part of our molecules and our cells will actually become other living things in an endless cycle is to me the most amazing thing I can think of. Like when I think of, and this is totally personal, just me,
Right.
when I think of like the idea of what happens to your soul, or if there is a soul, like none of that in my mind compares to the beauty and this the beauty of the science of what happens to our bodies. So I have a lot of comfort in that. So for me, there's no need to believe in
Yeah.
more. And I'm not saying that there is more. I'm not saying that there's not. I just, because I find so much comfort just in the science we know about it, I
Mm-hmm.
just don't have a need to believe more or feel like I need to know more beyond that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. I love that. Like, I haven't ever thought about it that way because, like, people don't ask me that question. I wish people would ask me that question because, like, I'm on the complete other end. I believe in everything. Like, I believe, like, when people ask what you believe, I believe in everything. And so it's never really been a question to me of, like, is there or isn't there? Like, I've just always kind of had this deep awareness that, like, of course there is, and all these things are true, and everybody's stories are true. But I love the way you look at it in that way, and that it just, for you, it's like, it's not even, you don't even need to go there. Like, you don't even really need to consider that, because just what happens that we know about is so amazing, and is so eternal, and kind of shows that, like, eternal cycle that we're still constantly being, like, recycled into the process.
Right.
But yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, I wish people would ask me that question so I could say I believe in everything.
Yeah, people ask me that strangely a lot. Um, but I think it's just because I'm very, I don't know why. I think it's just because I make it very clear kind of where I stand, but I'm also not judgmental, and
Right.
people
That's what
aren't
I was
used to
gonna say.
that, so then they
Yeah.
get curious.
Right. That's what I
So
was gonna say. Is that people can tell you're not judgmental, and so they're like, What's
yeah.
this about? Yeah.
And at the same time, it's like, that's just me. I mean, I'll explain that to people, and people are just like, yeah, that does not give me any comfort whatsoever, like believing this other thing does. And I'm like, well, if that's your self-care and is doing that, and that actually helps you feel more centered and be more confident and do the things you need to do, like,
Right. You got
go
to do it
for it.
for you.
Like,
Right.
yeah.
You boo. Yeah. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
that wouldn't work for me, But again, like, I got here with a completely different perspective on it. And, like, I was kind of always just, like, believing and seeing things that further that for me. And so yeah. So it's like, that wouldn't work for me, but that's because that's not how I was built.
Yeah.
So, but I think recognizing that, like, everybody has to, like, it's got to work for you, and so, like, that's, I think, the important part. I think a lot of times, like, organized religion is exclusive and can be very judgmental about other belief systems, and it's like, I've just kind of always had this, well, what works for you to live a good life and be a good person and not be, like, shitty to other people.
Yeah.
Just kind of like, whatever that belief system is for you, then do you.
I think, yeah, for me, it's just, the only thing I find is that it's important to realize that it's a belief system,
Yeah.
right? Versus I think where the struggle comes in when you think you're right and everybody else is wrong, because
Right.
that tends to no longer serve you as nurturing and motherly. That's tends
Mm-hmm.
to lead you to being judgmental and creating an other, which I think is very counter to the idea of mothering,
Right.
and nurturing
Yeah.
and creating.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, all those things can exist together. Like the science that we can see can be there, and someone can believe something, another person can believe that, as long as we're all clear on, I don't know if you guys are right or wrong. I'm just saying, I just see what we can see, and I'm
Right.
happy with that. And you guys want to go with what you believe, and we can all coexist, because we're not actually countering anything, as long as we understand that it's belief.
Yeah. Right.
Or,
Right.
and I think on the other side too, it's someone who is very intellectual and into the science is also acknowledging that just because we know this theory doesn't mean we've answered all the questions.
Mm. Yes.
Right. So
Exactly.
it's because I see that a lot of time too, as people who are more lean towards the science want to use the science to disprove people,
Mm-hmm.
and try to claim that the science is kind of already finite, and it's still not.
Right. Right.
We're still
Science.
learning. There's still more to explore. So, but
Exactly.
yeah, the issue then comes with when people are presenting, uh, I think, belief as fact, and then people who are more on the what you can see here side then come back with the facts and present them in a way that tries to negate what the believer is believing, even if it does or does not. So then there ends up being no communication. There's no nurturing. There's no anything. It's just a fight.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's true. I think that like that point about how kind of science plays into it is is important because yeah, the science is constantly evolving, and so is that information. And I mean, stuff that I learned in science class, like back when I was in school, is they've learned and they've expanded these things, and so like I think any belief system that you have to, again, like you said, have that awareness that it is a belief system and be able to recognize that that's one belief system and not everything, whether it's science or whether it's your faith that you grew up learning. You have, having that awareness, which I think comes with mindfulness, and practicing that of having that awareness that that's one belief system and that that's your lens.
And it is interesting to me that I find that the qualities that make a good scientist or intellectual is often the same qualities that for me, make a good believer, and that is there being a solid level of skepticism and curiosity.
Mm,
Because when you look at science, like science starts as a belief, and then
right.
you prove that belief,
Hmm.
right? And
Right.
you do it over and over until, oh, this happens every time, so this is now fact.
Hmm.
And
It
I
starts
think,
with the belief.
right, and I think it's it's dangerous on any level when you uh, kind of double down and the belief there's no longer the curiosity within it,
Hmm.
because then it shuts you down
Hmm.
to any other possibilities.
Right.
I
Yeah.
like how I somehow found a way to bring the mother back into the conversation. I did
Yeah,
it
no, I
very
know that
like
was good. Yeah, no, that was good because I mean, it does, it worked.
yeah. I didn't even realize I was doing it until I was like, "Oh, that was good." That was a good job. Good on
Like,
me.
looped it back around. Yeah. But I do think that, going back to how do we, how do we connect to that mother within ourselves and how do we learn how to mother ourselves? I think that's something that like, I feel like there's more of a, what's the word? I there's a cultural shift kind of happening, like there's a consciousness shift happening where I think we're starting to value those mothering characteristics a lot more and kind of recognizing that they're important and then we can't like divorce ourselves from them and take them out of business and out of things that are important and recognizing that those are powerful qualities to have and to hone and to connect to. And so I feel like there's something shifting and I'm excited about it because I think that those qualities are not as marginal. They're not being as marginalized in the way that they used to be of like, I just kind of remember that like attitude in the 80s of like, um, women in the office and kind of having to like wear the shoulder pads and like, just kind of like have that
Mm-hmm.
like fear of like, being if you react to something or have an emotional reaction, people saying you're on your period or something like that, and recognizing like that no, there's so much strength that lies within the mother and in mothers and in motherhood, and then that's actually if we can connect to that wholeness that we're as a whole more powerful
Yeah.
and healthier, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and more nourished. Because again, there's that nourishing that happens from the mother. You think about the umbilical cord and that nourishment that you get from the mother. And it's like, how do we nourish ourselves? Because I feel like we haven't been nourishing ourselves in that way. It's more kind of like, okay, be tough and like, kind of like that, like just a different attitude. And I think we have to like, we've got to nourish ourselves and love on ourselves in a very mothering way. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with I think 100% there's a shift, and I think we're seeing kind of uh, these energies that we've labeled the gender part of them are kind of starting to be broken down. And it's interesting because I'm producing this action fantasy web series, and we have a new production company that's doing it. And the main part of our production company, our goal is to create what we call gender equal action fantasy films. So the idea is it's weird to explain because you are assigning a gender in the way we explain it, but the whole purpose is that we are creating worlds that have transcended this issue. So within the storytelling, there is no genderism. Like, yes, people are gendered. It's not like, oh, everyone's trying to be gender neutral or anything like that.
Right.
It's just that in these worlds, the genders are completely equal, and nothing is. It's expected that they're equal. It's just there is no commentary. And I always say the big example is in a lot of. I think we've moved forward a lot, but even in Wonder Woman, it was Wonder Woman surrounded by a bunch of men who were like, oh wow, look at this,
look at her
do these things,
right?
And I think we saw a shift in Black Panther because it wasn't like that. It was kind of just the norm until they came into our, I guess, our society, and then there was a little bit of it. But in creating
Congo
it,
was intentionally not. Yeah, go ahead.
It's just interesting trying to create that world and to see what that, to just think a while, because it's not the world we live in, of how that would look and what that means for how people interact, and how you build a character who is a gendered being, and how the energies and how they present themselves in an environment where they can really be whoever they want to be. Because it's also not just about women being equal to men. It's about men not feeling like they have to be hyper masculine and above women. So in it, men are able to also be free to express themselves in the way that feels natural to them. So it's just an interesting. It's an interesting thing to be trying to create, and also trying to show, because in it, it's also not a part of the story. So it's not something where like we're making a statement about gender equality in our thing. It's just, okay, here's a story where there's these warriors who live in this world, and gender is just not an issue.
Right. And so it's like how do you take it, like how do you make it not a part of it, but still you have to kind of look at how much it's woven into everything, and then take that out without making that what the story's about.
Right. And I think too, it's interesting living in a culture where that is not the case, and seeing the things that people project on to things, because we've only released the first webisode, which is like 7 minutes.
And it was so good, by the way. I have to
you.
shout. I'm glad you mentioned it, because you guys need to check it out on YouTube. So good.
Yes.
Trials of Ember.
Yes. It's on YouTube, trialsember.com. Yep.
Yes. So because he's not going to shout it out, I'm going to shout it out.
Yeah. It's just interesting, the reactions we're getting, because some people see it right away, and other people think that we've actually had people think that it's too gendered, and that the roles are too stereotypical, which is interesting. But it's also, I can see why people would think that, because it's the problem. It's similar to what happened with Amy Schumer's movie, where people were outraged by the trailer. Have you seen this?
I saw the trailers. This where she, like, what's it called? Like, it's the one where she's like, all of a sudden thinks she looks different than she does.
She gets injured, and then
knocked in the head, and yeah.
So people were kind of outraged about when the trailer came out, about like, oh, you're trying to say that a woman only can think she's beautiful if she knocks herself out and has a concussion, and it's like, okay, well, you're making a judgment without even seeing the context of this full world they're creating. And when you see the movie, it literally has nothing to do with that. And when you see the movie, they never actually show what she's seeing in the mirror when she thinks she's beautiful. So people keep saying, "Oh, she thinks she's a supermodel," all these things, and I was like, "Yeah, but your biases are putting on her what you think she's seeing. You have no idea what she's seeing," and I think that's a huge point of the film. And that's kind of with ours too. It's like you see why these characters are the way they are because when you're introduced to their parents and their environment. But it's just interesting to see people like projecting their own biases onto something so early, which is, I think, I mean, we talk about that all the time, that's kind of what we love to do as a society.
People's favorite thing. Yes. We love it. We love it. We see a little tiny bit and we're outraged.
Yeah. But it's just interesting in talking about, because when you have the whole point of me even bringing this up was, I think what makes it fun to create is we're open to talking about all these things for every character. So it's not like we're just talking about Ember and we're like, how do we bring the mother to Ember, and like all these feminine things where we're talking, well, if this is gender neutral, how do we make her have masculine energy, and how do we make her have feminine energy, and how do we balance it, or is it out of balance, and because of that it's something else. And the same with my character Cypress. It's not ooh, he's just this masculine warrior. It's how does he incorporate the feminine and express himself in a genuine way for what he went through in a world where he's not expected to be a certain way because of his gender. He's expected to be a certain way because of the expectations of his role within the society, but not because he is a man.
Right. And I think with that, like, I could see like that has to kind of come out more, because I mean, like you said, it was like a 7-minute, and so you kind of see that there's something different about the roles in it. But I could see how people could go one end or the other, because it's like you haven't really gotten enough of the characters to kind of see more of them.
And again, like our intent, it's also interesting in just talking about it, because it's the hot button issue now, so everyone wants to talk about it. But it's weird in this because we get labeled as this female empowerment type thing, and it just and I get it when you're looking at it through the lens of our culture. It has a strong female main character, but in what we're trying to do, it's not female empowerment, because it's not. We're just telling a story about characters who are all strong and not defined by their gender. So to then define her by her gender seems kind of off what we're trying to do. But when you look at it through the cultural lens, it makes sense. So it's just very difficult.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say, is that through our lens, that's exactly what happens. And so you see how like our macro lens distorts, even when, like, you look at it, even just, when you were talking about that, I was just thinking about feminism in general, and the definition of feminism is not like women are overtaking men and like going to be more powerful. It's just equality. It's that women have the same opportunities and are not, just there's equality between the sexes. But a lot of that fear is that it's going to go too far, or that, it's going to knock the other gender off. And so I think you kind of see that with this fear of, well, so is this like a fully woman-centered production? And, and it's like, it's not even about that. It's just about people. But when we try to make things that are just about people feel like it's too much, right? It's shaking up the apple cart, which is similar to like what happens when people bring more diversity to roles and have more inclusivity with, in writers' rooms and on news, news productions. People get really upset on like CNN if Don Lemon has more than like two black people on at a time, because then all of a sudden there's like 3 black people on their screen, and people are like, is this BET? And it's like, no, like black people are here in the world. And so you kind of see how that happens. Like, we're here every day. Why does there have to be one? And that's okay. And so you kind of see that like this is what happens when people are trying to bring the marginalized fully into the room, into the discussion, into every part of the process, people, the non-marginalized group tends to freak out.
Yeah, there's also, it's interesting too because a lot of times the marginalized group tends to freak out as well, and I think a big problem with me uh, as an artist, which I've accepted, but it just always bothers me, is when you are, I guess, telling a story about marginalization in any way, which I think most good stories do. Um, there's a responsibility. I guess people want you to have this responsibility that I don't think one person should have.
Right.
And I'll give an example. I Love Simon came out, which was the movie
Mm-hmm.
about the high school boy who comes out as gay. And there was, I don't want to say backlash. There was a lot of commentary about how he was too masculine and he didn't represent this type of gay person over here and this type over here. And I'm like, I get where that comes from, because as a marginalized group, there's not enough representation to represent everybody. So
Right.
that when they see the very rare instance of someone who is supposed to represent them on screen and it doesn't fully represent them, they feel like, well, why wasn't I represented? Right? I understand that. But it's also, I mean, it can't be the creator's job to represent every single person in that community with one character. I mean,
Right.
it's one character having one experience, like one human, like
Mm-hmm. And
as
often,
any person. Yeah, go ahead.
right. And oftentimes it's coming from one person's experience or one person's story that inspired that. And so to kind of have that expectation, I think that you're right, that we do see that, but it's really not realistic. And people need to be responsible for telling the story that they're choosing to tell, but not kind of expected to tell everybody's, tell every facet of that story, because it's just not possible.
Yeah,
But I
yeah,
do think that that's why we need more stories told. And
right.
that's why it's so important that we have multiple different, stories being told about different marginalized groups from different voices and different perspectives and different socioeconomic status and everything, so that we can start to see a more representative,
Mm-hmm.
more representative media that people can like see themselves in.
Yeah, and I think as artists, it's just important to fight through that, because that's my issue with the whole female empowerment thing. It's not that I necessarily don't like care if it's labeled female empowerment or not. I'm telling the story I want to tell with my writing partner who's a female. But it's the idea that, oh, if it's labeled that, there's then we're gonna have this responsibility to represent female empowerment, which is actually not the focus of what we're doing.
Right.
Um, so it's often talking myself with, like, if we're labeled that, that's that, and if there's noise, but that's not what we're actually trying to do. We're trying to write a story about this human where at times she's going to be incredibly weak, and at times she's going to be incredibly strong, because that's what a human is. And when we're attacked because we're showing a weak woman and on
Mm-hmm.
screen, and people think that she should be strong in that instance, is reminding ourselves that, well, this is just one person. It's not representing how every female would behave in this scenario.
Right, right. And it's that much more important to kind of stick to your center of what you
Mm-hmm.
guys are trying to do, because it can be easy to be swayed by, well, it's too much this or it's too much that, kind of recognizing like that, no, it's not meant to be anything other than what we, what I
Yeah.
mean, what we were inspired to do. Because I could see how that kind of feedback and just kind of that, like, not necessarily causing to change anything, but just kind of question like how you are approaching that whole process.
And I think the discourse is, I mean, as a as an artist, I try not to let the discourse uh, make me second guess myself, but I
Mm-hmm.
also appreciate it, because okay, so I made this episode where this woman is weak in this scenario and people are outraged. Well, now I hope, because there was outrage, someone else goes makes another film with a woman who behaves differently in that scenario, because that's what it should be. There should be
Right.
500 films of women going through a similar thing, behaving completely differently because they have different life experiences and are different, unique human beings. And then I think once we have that, then that that demand or that expectation kind of goes away. Because I mean, you don't have that around white men in film. Like, oh, why that white dude spawned that way? Like,
right? Yeah, no, it's like white dudes in films get to be whatever kind of dude
yep.
they want him to be. He's gonna be that dude. Yeah, that's true. We'll get there.
Yeah,
we're working on it. You know, I
happening
really
slowly.
think there's like an artistic, creative revolution happening right now where people are really like sharing more, just more honest art, more authentic art, more diverse art. Like I'm so excited right now about like just the art that's coming out and what people are making. So
Yeah, I mean, it's just more accessible than ever to put your art out there and for people to actually see it. And I think that stops it from being overly controlled by corporations and
right.
powers that be deciding what the masses should and should not see, like it used to be. It just
Yeah,
isn't.
makes a big
It isn't
difference.
as much like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, this discussion started with mothers and then talking about art and creating, which again is a mothering process. Like art and creating something and bringing something into the world is like you got to mother it. And you got to love the heck out of that thing to like, you know, do it and complete it and share it. So
yeah, and it's interesting because for the second webisode in it, we introduce our mother. So we've been having a lot of discussions on who she is and
yeah,
and how
story.
to create, because we've been introduced to me and the lead character, who are siblings. So kind of seeing, oh, how do we create this woman who's their mother when we've already seen who they are, and they're both incredibly strong characters. So how do you represent the strength they're both showing in one being,
One person, right?
which is super fun. So
That sounds
excited.
fun.
She's so badass. Okay.
I'm excited to see it. It's really good.
Yeah, good.
All right. Well, happy Mother's Day, everybody, to all
Yes.
the mothers out there and people who are either have their mother, missing their mother, whatever your relationship with your mother, just love on you on that day and really kind of keep that in mind. I think every day, like how can I nourish myself? How can I mother myself right now? I think that's so important and we all need that medicine right now. So
Yeah. I would say my homework is just to, on Mother's Day, no matter where you are and what your connection to mother is, just take a couple minutes to self-reflect on what it means to you, and how you can, I guess, expand mother out into your surroundings and into the world, and create more of that energy, because I feel like that's a type of energy that there's never too much of.
yeah, I love that. Awesome.
Okay. Well, have a great Mother's Day, everybody, and we will see you next week.
See you next time.